The sun was setting over a quiet, wealthy neighborhood. The streets were clean, lined with tall trees and fancy houses with perfectly trimmed lawns. Chief Olivia Carter, a middle-aged black woman, walked slowly along the sidewalk, enjoying the peaceful evening. She was dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, her badge and gun left at home. Tonight she wasn't a police chief, just a regular person out for a walk. As she passed a row of parked police cars, she noticed a group of young officers standing by their vehicles. They were laughing and chatting, but the moment they spotted her, their expressions changed. Officer Ryan nudged Officer Blake and muttered something. Officer Carter, no relation to Olivia, narrowed his eyes. Something about Olivia didn't sit right with them. Maybe it was her relaxed confidence. Maybe it was the fact that, in their minds, she didn't fit in with the wealthy neighborhood. Whatever it was, they decided she was suspicious. "Hey, you!" Officer Ryan called out, stepping toward her. "Stop right there." Olivia glanced at them but didn't break her stride. She had done nothing wrong. "I said stop!" Ryan barked, his hand hovering over his holster. Olivia sighed and slowed her pace. She had been a cop long enough to know how quickly situations like this could escalate. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked calmly. Blake folded his arms. "We got a call about someone acting suspicious in the area." "And that's me?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You tell us." Officer Carter took a step closer, sizing her up. "Do you live around here? Do you live around here?" Olivia shot back unfazed. The officers didn't like that. Blake scoffed. "We need to see some ID." "I'm just taking a walk." "That's not a crime." Ryan smirked. "Resisting already? That's a bad idea." The three officers surrounded her, their body language turning aggressive. Olivia remained still, refusing to be intimidated. She had dealt with officers like this before, ones who let their badges go to their heads. "You have two choices," Blake sneered. "Show us ID, or we take you in." Olivia sighed. She could have ended this right now. One sentence, "I'm your boss," and this whole mess would be over. But she wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. And they were willing to go much further. "All right, that's it," Ryan snapped. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Before Olivia could respond, Officer Carter grabbed her arm. The other two moved in, shoving her roughly toward their car. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. She just shook her head. They had no idea what they were about to do. The commotion drew attention. Neighbors peeked out their windows. A few people stopped on the sidewalk, watching with wide eyes. Some pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The officers, however, didn't seem to care. If anything, the growing audience made them bolder. Ryan chuckled. "Bet she's got a record a mile long." Blake snorted. "She probably thinks she can just walk around like she owns the place." Officer Carter smirked. "Not anymore." Olivia remained silent as they yanked her arms behind her back. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. She had been in law enforcement for over 20 years, but never had she felt cuffs on her own wrists. A black SUV rolled up, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. Sergeant Daniels. He was older than the rookies, with graying hair and a permanent scowl. A man who had been on the force long enough to hold real power but had never been promoted beyond sergeant. He took one look at Olivia and scoffed. "What's the problem?" he asked, adjusting his belt. "Caught her lurking around, acting suspicious," Blake said proudly. "Didn't want to show ID," Ryan added. Daniels nodded like that was all he needed to hear. He turned to Olivia, looking her up and down. Then, with a smirk, he reached for her hoodie. "Let's see what you're hiding." Olivia jerked back. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" Olivia didn't answer. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Daniels scoffed. "Throw her in the car. We'll sort it out downtown." The rookies grinned as they pushed Olivia forward. The crowd murmured. A woman in a business suit stepped forward. "Excuse me, officers," she said. "Are you sure you—" "Step back, ma'am," Daniels snapped. "Official police business." The woman hesitated, then glanced at Olivia. "Are you okay?" Olivia smiled. "I'm fine." "But they're not." Daniels frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Olivia didn't answer. She let them shove her into the back of the squad car, sitting calmly as the door slammed shut. The officers laughed, congratulating themselves. Daniels wiped his hands like he had just taken out the trash. None of them realized they had just arrested the police chief. But they were about to find out. The police station was loud with ringing phones, chattering officers, and the hum of fluorescent lights. But inside the small holding area, there was only silence. Olivia Carter sat on a hard bench, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The officers who had arrested her stood near the desk, chuckling with each other. Sergeant Daniels leaned against the wall. Sipping from a coffee cup like this was just another routine arrest. She had seen this before, officers getting drunk on their own power, treating people like they were beneath them. They had no idea they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. "Hey," Olivia said calmly. "I want my phone call." Officer Ryan, still grinning, scoffed. Yeah? Relax, lady. You'll get your one call soon enough." Olivia tilted her head. "I'd like to call the mayor." The room went quiet. Blake let out a nervous chuckle. "The mayor?" "Yeah, right." "Sure." Ryan smirked. "And I'm calling the president next." But Sergeant Daniels wasn't laughing anymore. Something about Olivia's confidence sent a chill down his spine. He squinted at her like he was trying to remember something. That's when another officer entered the room. Lieutenant Harris, a senior officer who had been on the force for decades. He took one look at Olivia and stopped in his tracks. His face drained of color. "Chief Carter?" he whispered. The air shifted. Ryan frowned. "Wait. Chief who?" "Olivia Carter," the lieutenant said, his voice tight. "She's the chief of police." Ryan, Blake, and Carter all froze. Daniel's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and hit the floor, splattering everywhere. The officers stared at Olivia, their faces blank with shock. She leaned back against the wall, her expression unreadable. "I was going to tell you," she said casually. "But I wanted to see just how deep this would go." The room stayed silent. Nobody moved. Finally, Olivia turned to Lieutenant Harris. "Take these cuffs off." He scrambled forward, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the key. As soon as the cuffs clicked open, Olivia stood and rolled her shoulders, shaking off the stiffness. She looked at the group of officers, their faces now drained of arrogance. "I'd say I'm disappointed," she said. "But honestly, I'm not surprised." Daniels opened his mouth, but no words came out. This was no longer just an arrest. It was a career-ending mistake. And they knew it. The laughter was gone. The smugness had disappeared. Now, there was only pure panic. Sergeant Daniels took a shaky step forward. "Chief Carter, listen, this was a misunderstanding." His voice wavered, desperate. "If we had known..." Olivia's eyes snapped to him. "If you had known, you would have treated me differently?" Daniels swallowed hard. "I mean..." "Exactly," Olivia interrupted. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Ryan and Blake glanced at each other, their faces pale. Carter, the youngest of the group, looked like he might throw up. "Chief," Blake stammered. We were just following protocol." "What protocol?" Olivia snapped. "The one where you assume a black person in a nice neighborhood is a criminal? The one where you laugh while throwing someone in the back of a car for walking?" Ryan took a step closer, hands raised in surrender. "Please, Chief. We messed up. We really messed up. But we didn't mean to." Olivia gave a humorless laugh. "You didn't mean to? What exactly did you mean to do?" Nobody had an answer. Daniels tried again. "Look, Chief. We respect you." "No," Olivia cut him off. You respect the title, not the person wearing it. She took a slow step forward, looking them each in the eye. You saw a black woman, and you assumed she didn't belong. You didn't ask questions. You didn't stop to think. And now you're only sorry because you got caught. The three rookies looked down at the floor. Daniels clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. A door creaked open, and Lieutenant Harris stepped back into the room, holding his phone. His expression was unreadable. Chief, he said, the mayor is on the line. He wants to know if you want to handle this, privately. All four officers' heads snapped toward her. A flicker of hope flashed in their eyes. Maybe they could talk their way out of this. Maybe they could save their careers. But Olivia had already made up her mind. She took the phone, held it to her ear, and spoke four simple words. No. Fire them all. Ryan let out a strangled gasp. Carter actually whimpered. Daniel's face crumpled. No, please, Blake began, but Olivia wasn't listening anymore. She handed the phone back to Harris and turned toward the exit. Behind her, the officers stood frozen, watching their careers shatter before their eyes. For the first time that night, Olivia was surprised. She had expected them to be ashamed. But not one of them ever apologized. The next morning, the city was buzzing with shock. News stations interrupted their regular programming. Social media exploded with outrage. Headlines blared across the screen. Police chief wrongfully arrested by her own officers. At the press conference, Olivia Carter sat at the front of the room, flanked by the mayor and several senior officials. Cameras flashed as reporters threw questions at her, their voices overlapping. She raised a hand, and the room fell silent. Last night, Olivia began, her voice steady but firm. I was unlawfully detained by members of my own department. A murmur ran through the crowd. The mayor nodded beside her, his face grim. I was not read my rights. I was not given a chance to explain myself. Instead, I was mocked, humiliated, and treated as a criminal. Why? She let the question hang in the air for a moment. Because I am a black woman in a wealthy neighborhood. The room was dead silent. Even the reporters, usually eager to jump in, were stunned. Olivia continued. If I weren't chief of police, I would have been another statistic. Another case swept under the rug. But I am the chief. And I refuse to let this go unanswered. She turned to the mayor, who cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. As of this morning, Officers Ryan, Blake, and Carter have been terminated, he announced. Sergeant Daniels has been dismissed and will not be receiving his pension. Gasps rippled through the audience. Olivia nodded. And that's not all. An internal investigation into the entire department is underway. We will expose every instance of racial profiling and misconduct. This is not about one mistake. It is about a culture that must be changed. A reporter raised a hand. Chief Carter, what would you say to those officers now? Olivia exhaled slowly, then looked directly into the cameras. I would say this, she said. You didn't just lose your jobs. You lost the trust of the people you swore to protect. And that is a punishment far worse than anything I could give you. The press conference ended, but the city's conversation had only just begun. Meanwhile, across town, former officers sat in their homes, watching the news unfold in horror. Ryan clenched his fists. Blake stared at the TV, his face pale. Carter looked like he might cry. Daniels just sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at his empty coffee table. His entire pension, gone. Decades on the force, wiped away in a single night. They had laughed at Olivia Carter. But now, no one was laughing. A week later, Olivia Carter walked into the police department, not as a suspect, not in cuffs, but as the one in charge. She stepped to the front of the briefing room, where dozens of officers sat at attention. Some looked nervous. Others looked ashamed. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. Let me be clear, Olivia said, her voice firm. What happened to me was not an accident. It was not just a mistake. It was a pattern that has existed for far too long. She scanned the room, making sure every officer met her gaze. But from today forward that pattern ends. The department was silent. No one dared to move. We are implementing new policies, she continued. Mandatory anti-bias training. Body cam reviews. Clear consequences for profiling and misconduct. This will not be a department where discrimination thrives. A few officers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement. Olivia pressed forward. I know some of you are angry, she said bluntly. Maybe you think those officers shouldn't have been fired. Maybe you think I should have let it go. She narrowed her eyes. If that's the case, I suggest you turn in your badge right now. A long pause. No one moved. Then, Olivia leaned forward and delivered the final blow. If I weren't chief of police, she said, this would have been just another case swept under the rug. But I am chief. And that means real change starts today. Across town, former officers watched the speech unfold on TV. Ryan sat on his couch, staring blankly. Blake rubbed his hands over his face, unable to process what had happened. Carter muttered something under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Daniels, once a respected sergeant, sat alone in his dark living room. His uniform was still draped over the chair, but it no longer belonged to him. For the first time, they understood. Karma had been served.